Hi, welcome to this video on cover letters or job letters. It follows a previous one that I did on resumes, and like that one, this is based heavily on the career guide document published by our College of Engineering's Career Resource Center, so as to maximize consistency with any advice you may be receiving from other resources that we have on campus. The first point we have here is that cover letters, particularly for entry level or near entry level sorts of early career positions, the standard is that they should be within one page. Also, they should be written for the specific position. So, much more so than with a resume, where you might do some tweaking depending on the position. With a cover letter, it is very important to really custom craft it for each position depending on the organization and the particular job involved. Now, sure, you'll reuse portions of it, and depending on how similar the position and job is, you might reuse substantial portions of it. But it's very important to make sure that you're looking through every sentence, every word, to make sure that it's really what you want for that particular audience. Because not only does it help optimize the impact for that position you're seeking, but it also helps avoid any embarrassing carryovers where you may have included something that was tailored to a different position but is clearly not applicable to another one. And that does happen a lot with people who are just kind of not being careful enough in mixing and matching different portions of cover letters. Another issue comes up with emailing cover letters. So, what to write in the email when the cover letter is attached, because it can be tempting in that situation to want to say something about your interest in the position, even though you have the cover letter attached. And so it's pretty important to treat this sort of like the what's sometimes known as an enclosure letter, where it's just a one or two sentence, you know, uh, warm, polite, but very succinct and not getting into anything substantive. Just referring to the fact that your cover letter and resume are attached. You look for thank them for their consideration. Look forward to hearing from them. Some niceties that talk around your actual qualifications or interest, because you don't want to step on the impact that you so carefully structured your cover letter itself to make. So that is an important thing to keep in mind. Okay, so let's look now here at the format that they recommend. And just like I said with regard to resumes, um, there are different approaches on some of these things. If you look at some different books and websites about how to format these, there'll be some different views on it. But for our purposes, we're going to stick with the advice here. And the first thing we have is the name and address being at the top in a sort of letterhead fashion, the same way that they appear on your resume. So you might want to sort of design that with both documents in mind, and sort of treat that as your personal letterhead. Then they have here the date on its own line, and and then the cluster of information about the recipient. So you have the person you're addressing it to. Hopefully, ideally, you know who that is. Uh, a lot of times in a job posting, or if you learn about a potential opportunity through networking, you often know the specific person. It sometimes may be an HR representative, sometimes it may be a particular person at a if it's a smaller organization, it might be a particular person who's just been designated the point person for that hiring. It may not necessarily be the decision maker. It's best to try to find that out if you can, but of course, always follow whatever instructions there are for who to address it to, while still doing whatever research you can for who the actual decision makers may be. Sometimes you don't have a specific person. Sometimes you're just stuck uh, talking around that. Maybe you know it's a hiring committee and you can put that. Sometimes all you know is a title and you put that. But if possible, it's best to have a contact person. Um, it also mentions the title, if possible. So here it's referring to job title. Now, there's also the issue of prenominal title, which would go before the name. Those are uh, uh, honorifics like doctor or professor or Mr. or Ms. or Mrs. Those aren't usually essential. So if you're not completely sure that you know the correct one, it's typically safer to leave that off. There are a few circumstances where it's essential to have the correct prenominal, but those are fairly rare. So usually it's safer to leave that off and just have comma job title. And Sometimes, if you know that a person tends to prefer to have a degree or credential after the first comma before getting into the job title, then you can include that as well. Uh, the next thing is, after the associated information that goes with the recipient, is the greeting. So the convention for any business letter, job letter or otherwise, is to have dear, and if you know the name, back to the point we made up here, if you know the name, then you put that here, and then you have a colon afterwards. If you don't know the name, like I said, if you're stuck saying hiring committee or whatever the case may be, that can sometimes work. Okay, so moving on to the actual content of the letter. Uh, we have three paragraphs. We have the introduction, we have 1 to 2 in the middle, and we have the closing. So 3 or 4 paragraphs, depending on how you structure your middle paragraph. The first paragraph, establishing the purpose of your letter, explaining why you're interested in it. So this can include things like mentioning if there's a particular job posting that you're responding to. That can be something that's particularly for a large organization where they have to keep track of a lot of different postings going on at the same time. It's very convenient to include right away in the first sentence what job posting number, or at least what position you're applying to. But the point is, after you deal with that initial matter of fact aspect, you need to get onto this part, is your direct personal interest in the company and the role. Because it's important to keep in mind that they don't just care about the fact that you want to be X, but that you want to be X for them. And so you need to kind of keep both of those in mind as soon as you pivot to this emphasis on your interest in the position and company. So after sort of initiating that that and establishing that interest that you have in that position and that company, you need to tie that to some aspects about your qualifications. Now, this can be tricky because your resume is in there, and you don't want to be too redundant with your resume, but you need to have some overlap so that you're connecting key information from your resume to the interest that you just expressed. This part is tricky, consider including how you learned about the position or the employer. So There's a bit of an art to that because name dropping is sometimes considered a little tacky. So you want to try to couch it in a way that doesn't sound like you're just looking for an excuse to mention somebody who works at that company. But, sometimes there's no real way around having to take the risk that it sounds like name dropping. So, hey, if somebody at a company told you about an opening, uh, you don't want to not point that out if you think it might help you, but you just want to try to not be too brazen about it at the same time. It's a balance, like a lot of subtle, tactful things are in communication. Um, and then you want to conclude this paragraph by again, kind of going back to this second bullet point about uh, the issue aspects of your resume that you think are most relevant. But having said that, we're not actually getting into those details yet. We're kind of foreshadowing uh, that we're about to get into those. So you're kind of creating a sort of transitional sentence. So this middle part is sort of the heart of it, right? It's 1 to 2 paragraphs depending on how you choose to organize your thoughts, but the key here is to basically make an argument. This is sort of an argumentative rhetorical exercise where you're taking the facts in your resume and the facts about the company and the position, and you're not rehashing either. As it says here, do not simply restate your resume, but you're taking those two sets of facts and integrating them into an argument. So, yes, you'll refer to some of the facts about the company, even though they know about their own company. You'll refer to some of the facts from your resume, even though your resume is right there on a separate piece of paper or separate PDF. But you're restating them for the purpose of integrating them and connecting them in a way that makes the argument that what you have fits what they need. And sometimes part of doing that is elaborating and explaining things in your resume, uh, either in a different way or in selective depth that isn't really suited for a resume because it's not just a bullet point. Maybe you need a few sentences to do it in a certain case, or maybe you need sort of to shift the proportional emphasis. So in a resume, you need to have somewhat more balanced treatment for your various experiences because that's not as customized for each position as we were discussing before. But with a cover letter, you can say, there's this aspect of this position and this other aspect of this position that really tie in most directly to what I think I could bring to you. Sometimes, being realistic, sometimes you don't necessarily have uh, as strong of a combination of experiences that are a great fit, and you're trying to make the best case you can because it's a job you really want. But you know, especially at early career stages, or even if you're making a career switch down the road, you might just be in a situation where your experiences at this point aren't a perfect match, in which case you need to make the best case you can, just like we talked about with resumes. Sometimes you don't necessarily have the most relevant experience, but you still put things on that are as relevant as you can based on whatever skills and overlap there may be. And so, same thing, you make the case. And sometimes it takes more skill to make the case when it's a bit more of a stretch, but you do the best you can. Don't be afraid to also just talk about the fact that you want to get started in that field. People can see through an attempt to fluff too much. So if if you find yourself in that situation, just make sure you're clear about the fact. I would say, even as you're concluding the first paragraph, before you even start getting into making the best case you can, really just make it clear that you might even say, uh, although I haven't worked in this field yet, I am very passionate about it and really want to learn, and I think this position would be a good fit for that. Now, don't do that if you're not applying to an entry level position, but if you're applying to a position that doesn't necessarily require a lot of extensive experience, or maybe have some flexibility on how much experience they're looking for, sometimes passion and determination and commitment to learn can be a partial substitute, and all you can do is hope that that the audience is receptive to that case. I will say that it is important to do what it says here, focusing more on what you can do for the employer more than what you're looking to get out of it. Now, that doesn't mean they're mutually exclusive, and ideally, you show that it's going to be a mutually beneficial fit. Good employers want their employees to be fulfilled in their positions, but it's important not to make it seem like that's your primary objective. Everyone knows that it's got to be a mutual fit, but try to be more explicit and overt about what you can do for the organization. And even if you're talking about how passionate you are, how much you want to do it, that's great. But try to make sure that it's framed in the context of how you think that determination, that passion, that interest would benefit the organization, and then let it more be implied that you would also enjoy having that position as well. All right, and then for the closing paragraph, like a lot of closing paragraphs for various sorts of documents, it typically includes a recap of the key points, which can be, depending on the situation, some combination of abstracting um, uh, in a broader way the points that you made in your middle paragraphs, while also maybe restating one or two key specific points that you really want to make sure they remember. And and then the last sentence or so is usually some generically polite statement expressing appreciation for their consideration, and saying that you hope or look forward to uh, further contact, basically trying to get an interview, which is typically the next step. I would avoid anything sounding too presumptuous, like uh, anything implying that you expect to hear from them, or saying that you'll be following up. Even if you do follow up, I think it's important not to phrase it too strongly. There's a balance of initiative without being presumptuous. Then sincerely is typically a nice closing. The other thing they have here is an example. So as you can see here, we assume that letterhead is the same as what this hypothetical student put on their resume. I notice here that there are some inconsistencies here, because they have a comma here after the greeting, when back up here they correctly had the colon. And just so you know, the colon is correct. I said I would stick to what's in the guide here, but this is clearly a typo, because business letters always use a colon, and they actually had it correct on the previous page. So we had the contact person. Like up here, it said try to have the contact person if you can, but in this case, we don't have either a contact person or a title. So it's just the company name. And there are times, as I said, when that's all you have to go on. Usually, a large company is going to give you some guidance as to who to address it to, but maybe not. And sometimes you can just infer a generic name or phrase, I should say, for who the recipient is. So I think saying, "Dear Amazon hiring representative," if you don't know what the title is or who the person is, that is actually okay because you're not suggesting that their title is hiring representative. You're just ascribing that phrase to whoever is going to be responsible for doing the hiring in this context. So that's actually a reasonable way to handle this situation without having to resort to the trait, to whom it may concern. And because it's a large company, you can assume that. That they have somebody in charge of organizing and coordinating any hiring. In this case, they are able to refer to a position that they had the summer between junior and senior year. But everyone has to have a first position at some point, and sometimes that is, in fact, the first full-time position that a person seeks upon graduation. So the you can read through here, and I've posted a link to this, and it's also at the ECRC guide. So just like I said with the resume examples, these are available. But we have the introductory paragraph that refers to the position. Talks briefly about the interest and skills that seem to match, the highlights from the resume, and then spends the middle two paragraphs here doing a deeper dive on the relevant experiences and why they are relevant and connected and applicable to the position being sought. Then we have this sort of broad recap at the end here in the last paragraph, and a strong suggestion that they would appreciate an interview, and are hopeful that they will get an interview. All right. So this is I think, a good example. It's actually the only example that they have. I know with the resumes there were a few examples, and there's no shortage of examples in various other resources that you can look at as well. But hopefully this gets you started, and hope you found this helpful, and see you in another video. Take care.